Hey guys, on today's show we're receiving Caroline Valerud. She's partner at Walerud Ventures, a deep tech pre-seed investment firm. They are the first investors in Klarna and investors in green tech and deep tech companies like Midsummer, Swedish Algae Factory, Satcube, and Graphmatech. Caroline has been an entrepreneur since the age of 14, and she's part of many startup journeys. Now she splits her time between two startups where she's chairman and co-founder. Volumental, creating custom shoes through the use of 3D scanning and AI, and Air Forestry, reinventing forestry with the use of electric drones. We will hear a perspective on the hands-on Walerud investment model, why Europe seems to trust more finance experts than entrepreneurs as fund managers, and we will discuss the different roles one can play in climate tech today. Let's go. Caroline, welcome to Climate Insiders.
Thank you. It's great to be here, Jan.
First of all, you just came back from maternity leave, so congratulations. And now you're already going all in, back to work, taking board meetings, powering through investments. But I'm imagining that it was good to take a little break from life.
Well, it was a break from one kind of life for sure, and it's really good being back as well. As a family office, with my parents and I working there, they've been very supportive and happy to have a grandchild. So
nice. We'll get to that. I have a lot of questions on the family dynamics. But first of all, for people that don't know you, and I'm imagining that people outside of the Nordics might not necessarily know your family office, could you briefly describe Walerud Ventures? So your fund size, your geography, the typical ticket size.
Yeah, so Walerud Ventures is a family office. It's made up of three entrepreneurs, myself, my mother and my father, Jane and Bengt. And we've all been entrepreneurs before, started several deep tech companies, been CEO there, exited. And in 2016, we decided to start investing more together. And that was when I stopped being CEO of my baby startup, Volumental. My mom just sold her startup, and my dad left the consulting firm where he was working. So since then, we've been working together specifically on deep tech for the climate and for the living planet. And we invest generally up to €1 million per company. In the beginning, especially, we would start investing with less, and then we would invest up to that amount. Now we are a little bit more flexible. The best investment we've done financially is Klarna, where we were the first investors. So as Klarna has grown, it means we've been able to invest more money in our companies. We invest mainly in Sweden and in very early stage deep tech. So and then we go in and work very actively with those founders. So max 2 companies per partner at a time, so that we can spend like 1 or 2 or up to 5 days a week with that company in the beginning to help them get going.
Exactly. So the main specificity of your fund is that you don't just invest in them, you join them. Can you explain how that works exactly? So you, first of all, curious to know how you select the projects. 2 of them is not a lot. And then how you decide whether you're going to spend 2 or 5 days with the founders.
Yeah. Oh, it's tricky to decide, but it is a very good filter for selection when it's not only that it has to be a great case and we like the team and we believe in the potential, but also we have to say, okay, I actually want, or one of us 3 really wants to spend a couple days a week working at this company and working together with the team. And that means that I guess we have an extra high bar in terms of projects we feel really passionate about and teams that we feel, okay, these are people I really want to work with. So that's how we sort of select from the beginning. In terms of how much time we spend with the companies, it's really about what they need and how we can help. We're all sort of startup generalists. So if I give the example of Volumental, the company I founded, I was CEO for the first 3 years. And then since then, I've been executive chairman and helping the CEO in lots of areas. So as you know, a startup in the beginning, you don't have each of the executive positions filled. So I've jumped in and I've been kind of head legal, responsible for marketing, recruitment, and people and talent, marketing, all these different areas. And in addition to the general sort of board work. So we can jump in and do all those roles and also help more generally in the beginning to make sure that the company doesn't make exactly the same mistakes we've already made in previously companies, but rather hopefully find some new and a little bit more informed mistakes to make.
That's probably the most hands-on model I've seen out there, since you're one of the
Hmm.
co-founders. And that's also the ultimate smart money, right? So you allocate capital, intelligence, your network, and active work, but it begs the question of the duration of your assignment, and how does the team and other investors feel if when you pull out, when you decide to leave the boat. So for example, Volumental, super active for 3 years, slowly, divesting your time and involvement.
That's true. In that case, I think, I mean, I just love being. I'm at Volumental's office right now, and it's a great vibe being here. So I spend quite a lot of time here still. I learn a lot. I'm still helpful to the company. In this case, it's been a situation where I'm as active as the people in the team and the board want me to be. But of course, it's not great having like a full-time chairman and co-founder in like helping in lots of different areas as the company matures and becomes more of a professional organization. So I think here it's quite natural, and there's been no so to say, like conflict between the different stakeholders, so to say, in terms of how much I should be involved. And it's a really open conversation I have also with the CEO of the other company I'm working actively with now. I mean, every time not every time, but at least once a month when we talk, it's like, okay, so what do you think? What could I do more of? What should I do less of? If you want me to change one thing, what would that be? And really try to act on that so that I don't either overextend or pull back too far.
And how is the rest of the investor syndicate? So the other
Mhm.
investors, particularly VCs, that seem to be, to have a particular angle on this. How do they
Yeah.
feel when you're pulling out from an assessment? Let's just call it a.
I mean, it depends a lot on the specific case, but I mean, it's quite a natural transition, and we're quite clear that as soon as there are specific executives in place and the company becomes more and more self-sufficient, so to say, it makes sense for us to pull out. We're not usually employees at the company, right? We're like a super active board member and kind of co-founder or bouncing board for the co-founders and management team. So yeah, I think that other investors like it when we're quite active. Of course, as that like if it really helps the company, for example, like do a much better fundraising round and help it, when the company hits some crisis, we have that time to go in and really work actively. But then there's also the fact that over time, I mean, it is a trade-off. You might want more of a division between the board and investors versus like the actual operating team. And it's never really been a problem. Usually when the company gets a Series A round or so, it really makes sense to take a step back and become more of a standard board member. But it's something we discuss with the new investors or the investors coming in also. I mean, they're interested, of course, in who's on the team, and they want to know how, if that means that I'm or my mom or dad are very active or more taking a step back.
Yeah, well, so that makes sense, right? Now, I want to use this as a proxy to a crucial point, and I want to back it up with important numbers, which, in my opinion, highlights one of the core investment problems in Europe. If you take the scan of the U.S. ecosystem, at top-tier venture capital firms in the U.S., 60% of investors have experience working at a startup. At top VC firms, 60% of investors, so the vast majority, have been entrepreneurs or operators in startups.
Yeah.
Now, coming to Europe, that's a bit of a different story. European VCs talk about being founder-friendly, hands-on, but the vast majority of them have never been actually running a startup or even worked in one. There's
Right.
actually new data from Vauban suggesting that European VC ranks remain heavily filled with former bankers,
Mhm.
consultants, private equity investors are low, and they're low on former startup operators. In the
Yeah.
UK, just 8% of investors have experienced, firsthand of what's like to be in a fast-growing company. Isn't it bonkers?
Yeah. Did you say 8% in the UK?
8%.
Yeah, you're comparing a little bit because you said top U.S. investors versus all European, but still, it seems likely that even in Europe, then it is a lot lower, and that's what I've experienced as well.
Mm-hmm.
I can understand that in a way that it has happened that way because of well, I don't know
Why is that?
actually.
Why is that?
Um, my
I have
experience.
suggestions, and you can pick the option that you think.
Yeah, okay, go for it. Go for it.
How about we turn it, turn it
Yeah.
around? So I really see three main reasons, right? Either there's a lack of maturity of the European space, which means that there's only been 2 to 3 generations of founder success stories versus 12 in the US since the 70s. So we haven't had enough capital recycling and entrepreneurs turning investors. That's option one. The second one is in Europe, we tend to value hard skills over soft skills. So hard skills is very much financial driven, or financial literacy, structure, processes, on a deal, over soft skills with the American mindset, judgment, psychology, drive. There's a second option, and a third one. And I don't want to bias the answer here, but I think it's a more profound one. It's a structural problem with a higher barrier to entry to become a fund manager in Europe. The gatekeepers in Europe that are the makers or breakers of VC funds are banks, pension funds, government funds, and they're from a different generation. So they value and have more trust in finance and bankers' profiles because they invest in profiles that they understand and that look a lot like them.
Both the profiles, but also the way of communicating. Someone who's an entrepreneur, husband will say, this can be massive, it can be great, like look at all the huge problems we're solving. Of course, this is going to be huge. And that's quite different from the way a banker would explain it and show lots of graphs and Excel sheets and things. So yeah, I like all those three explanations. I don't know the stats on this, but if we go back to point one, I assume that you're correct, that there are many fewer entrepreneurs in general in Europe because we haven't been so entrepreneurial as long, meaning that there's just fewer with that mindset to choose from. That's fair. The second point, the hard versus more soft skills, I felt very personally myself because I studied I was a natural scientist at Cambridge, so I studied like neuroscience, genetics, zoology. And then in the UK and also in the US, which is I'm a bit culturally from there, I thought, okay, well, I'll go home to Sweden and I can get a job in a bank, or I was actually not looking at banks, but I was looking at consulting and other strategy jobs. And they all said, wait, but you didn't study industrial economics or economics or finance. So, we don't have a job for you. Go do a master's in finance and then come back. Whereas in the Europe or the US, they'd say, oh, you have a great degree from Cambridge. You're smart. You know how to learn. And you'll be able to learn the stuff on the job because you've proven that you're good at learning, and you'll have lots of interesting skills from that field, which will, help in this.
That's
so
right.
That's very different as well. And I do think that's probably part of the problem that
you can definitely come from a Bachelor of Art in ancient Greek history and then become a trader or a VC fund manager.
I have several friends who did that in the UK, and then I get home to Sweden and I'm like, hey, biology, it's a little bit more hardcore in some ways than history. And then they were getting banking jobs and I couldn't even get a basic business job as my first job. So that's how I got a startup job, and I'm very glad for it now that I didn't end up on the consulting track, but that's how I got my entrepreneurial journey started. So yeah. But it's a good question. It's a really interesting question. And I think it's a big problem for European startups because it means, especially, lead investors always want to stick a board member on the startup board. And then if you have someone who has not really been there, especially, it's very good maybe if you have between 4 and 8 board members that one of them is really good at finance and understands, how to address the company for next investment, for loans, the financial side. But the other people, the majority of people on the board should be people who are industry experts or somehow can help with something, some other aspect of the company building. And I find that a lot of European startup boards will then be filled with 3 or 4 investor representatives who are all, have kind of a similar background. And that's not helpful for those companies to grow.
How do we solve that? Do you think more VCs should emulate the Walerud model?
I think it will be hard because we've made a choice of focusing on a few and and not, and it means we have to say no to hundreds of great startups, thousands of great startups every year. And I can understand that a VC with a fund, they want to invest in at least like 10 to 50 companies over the fund's lifetime, and we don't really do that. So I can see that's hard. But what you can do is, instead of putting yet another finance person on your portfolio's board, is that you look at, okay, you talk to the management team and say, okay, what are the biggest challenges you see that the company will have in the coming 2 years? And the type of experiences that you will have in the coming 2 years that you don't yet have represented in your company. And then ask around in your network, okay, who do we know that actually has already, for example, expanded from Sweden to the U.S. Or built, transformed a sort of license model into more of a software as a service, or worked with this specific type of distribution model, which we're working on, or scaled up this industrial process, and find someone who has that expertise. And then, of course, as an investor, you still want to follow your investment, but maybe you can then ask, to receive just the board reports, or that the startup makes sure to be transparent about financials and stuff on a quarterly basis or something, also with investors who don't have a direct representative on the board. It's tricky, but that I think that would be a massive lift for European startups.
Yeah, absolutely. Another way to emulate the Walerud model is to start family offices only and work with your dad and your mom. I doubt that I will be able to do this. My mom still doesn't understand what I do. But can you speak a little bit about the dynamics? How do you even split, projects internally? And do you think it's more founders that have this entrepreneurial, more families that have this entrepreneurial spirit should emulate that? And the barrier to entry is lowered over time, or no? It's really for an elite of successful serial entrepreneurs.
Good question. So most family businesses, I guess, will have made their money somehow, or the family offices kind of. So say that they have been in the publishing business or the real estate business or something. So there is some core of expertise in an area. I see it would be really cool if more families that have made their money in that way would spend more of their time and money and expertise helping, the next generation of great technology in that field. And that's an easier way to get into it. And then going from that, say that you go from real estate to then real estate technology and maybe more sustainable building materials. And then from there, you can go into more industrial, and that's an easier way maybe to come into the field. I think most investors will have an area that they like investing in, and they want to do repeats of that type of model. And I think that makes sense for most people. What we've said is, if we've done it in a company of a certain type, we're like, we don't really want to do something too similar because we want to try something new, learn something new. But yeah, I guess it might be smarter, and we'd be even wiser advisors to the companies if we just went, if we really dug into one even narrower niche. And focused on that. But that, and I think is something one can do. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you speak about the dynamics on deal making? So how do you select projects? How do you, is there an investment committee around the dinner table? Yeah. Or everyone has their own channel based on your emotional attachment to a particular vertical or a founder? There's this level of trust where you kind of follow each other almost blindly if one is really attached to your project.
Our investment committee is us three. I guess someone could veto a company if we really didn't like it. But if someone says, hey, I'm willing to spend 2 days a week on this for the next 2 years, that's a pretty strong, vote of confidence. So we try to support in that case. In terms of the deal flow and where we get it from, it's quite varied. Our main deal flow is from being kind of known deep tech entrepreneurs, and we try to do events like this, like speak on podcasts and go to events and be helpful in like roundtables and things like that. So we get to know really early stage entrepreneurs already out at the university tech incubators, so that we get really good early deal flow from there. But actually, the last few investments we've made, we've at least Air Forestry, where I'm now a co-founder and board member, was actually a cold email we received from them.
Wow.
And we have too much going on right now, so we're not doing any new investments at the moment. So we've turned that off on the website, but we've just had like a form on the website where you can fill in. And we would go through those and not reply to all of them, but the ones that were relevant, we would really look at them, even if they weren't a warm intro. And that's because I think many of those really great tech innovators, they might not have that fully formed team yet and might not know how to write a great investor email or how to find the warm connection, and we want to then find that person and help that amazing technology create that original team, and so they can start commercializing and scaling up. We don't really mind if the team is not fully formed in that sense. So it's a little bit different.
A good segue into one of the verticals you picked. Your next avenue is air forestry. Air forestry is as deep tech as it gets, and definitely aligned with the climate fight. So just high level, they're reinventing forestry through the use of drones, electric drones. You have to imagine the size of the drone is like a flying taxi that hopefully.
Yeah, it's 6.2 meters in diameter, so it's a very large drone. Yeah.
Definitely applicable to Sweden. Sweden has a huge coverage of forests. And how did you pick such a crazy venture, which sounds like science fiction? Coming from Volumental, that does just basically 3D printing or 3D analysis and AI for
3D scanning. For yes. Well, Volumental is very much high tech as well. And especially if you think that we were founded 10 years ago, and then there was no such thing as 3D scanning from home. And we were the first people to have any technology that could do that in an easy way. But yeah, so that was,
you would agree that the stretch is not obvious.
No, that's true that they're in quite different verticals. I agree with that. So how do we find air forestry? Well, as I mentioned, it was a cold email. As we realized what this was, we just realized wow, this is what is needed for forestry. Forests are a huge part of capturing carbon, storing carbon, all the biomaterials we need for moving away from plastics and other nasty building materials towards wood. They're an amazing resource, and we are taking very badly care of them at the moment in the world. Air forestry basically figured out, okay, at last we are now at the stage where drones are good enough and batteries are good enough that we can actually do the logging, or thinning in this case. So when you thin out, you remove some of the trees to let the remaining trees grow better, which is a very important forest management initiative. So you can do that from the air. And compared to other applications where you use drones, which are meant to go in cities or need very long transport, this is a situation where there are so many forest roads in Sweden. So the average cycle to go out to a tree, delimit, cut it, and then lift the whole tree out and back to the road takes an average of 90 seconds. So you can do a few of those rounds, and then you can switch the battery and let that one charge and then go out again. So it's a much closer application today and doesn't require such a massive battery, which means we can use more of the drone's lifting capacity for actually lifting out trees, small trees. So
there's also lower regulation because you're not transporting people, only transporting trees in dead zones.
Yes.
There's no, there's no houses.
Generally,
it's
no
not
people.
urban areas.
And there's still a lot of regulatory hurdles, but we're getting through them in a very nice pace now. So that's cool. So that was the technical aspect. We realized, wow, this can be done. And the current way it's currently being done is just terrible. The machines that go in today weigh between 15 and 30 tons. You need two of them, and they just destroy. You need 20% of the forest like floor area just to move these trucks forward, meaning that although that's 20% of the forest, which you just have to remove just to go in and do the thinning and the forest management services. And you get a lot of damage to the soil, the root systems, the ecosystems in general. So that was huge. And then we saw that the team was really excellent. So the three co-founders had been working on really relevant aspects of this for a long time. So the Olle, who's now the CEO, he had been working with Skogforsk, the Swedish forest research organization, for 8 years on projects doing specifically autonomy and electrification of forest systems, like these big machines going in. The other co-founder, Maurits, who is CTO, he is one of the leading experts in Europe on electric flight and has been working on electric flight as a researcher for many years. And the third co-founder, Marcus, he's actually built nature management companies from scratch and understands like how all the aspects that go into that when you're not just working on a nice little app and software, but having to go out and working with real people, real forests, lots of these production teams. Nature's a lot less predictable and kind than just having an app on a phone. So that was the core founding team, and there was one tech developer employed at that time. So it was a really amazing team. So those were two of the aspects that meant that we were really excited about them. And obviously we spent quite a lot of time going through and figuring out if it really seemed to be feasible and if there were good barriers to entry. That's something we really like with the deep tech side, right? If there's something that it's hard to do, and each of those problems you then solve means that you have more and more barriers to entry for other players. And ideally, it means that you were so early in a space that you're able to patent a lot as well, or some other way of protecting the area so that you don't, you're not just relying on which company has the largest marketing budget, but you can rely on who has the best technology and make sure to scale that up.
What's fascinating also about your story is that you come from a generalist background, so that the next gig, the next assignment could have been anything. Could have been fusion, could have been, hydrogen, and you picked forestry.
Yeah.
Maybe there's an affection for forest. There's something deep inside you that was kind of triggering you an emotional connection. But anything that's applicable to others, the question I get from people that are trying to join the climate fight is, should I be an investor or should I be an operator? For that, there's many roles in between, right? So you could be a board member, you could be an advisor, so forth and so on. So that's kind of the first angle of to read this question. And the second is which sector? It is so broad. Climate is not a niche sector anymore. It's just so vast. What's your take on this? How do you place in sort of the 4-quadrant matrix your bet? And where you will, allocate 5 years, 10 years of your life.
Yeah. I guess there's many very good ideas that come our way, but there's not that many that I feel that tick all the boxes in terms of, wow, this is really neat. And I want to work with this team for a few years. So I wasn't specifically looking for a forestry related company when we found Air Forestry. What I was looking for was something biotech or biology related, since I'm a biologist by training. And I find like the cell level and protein level biology incredibly exciting. And I'd love to do a company in that space. This is more ecosystem level, also very exciting. But I'm very glad to be combining biology with entrepreneurship and deep tech. In terms of what the next area, I think probably I'll stay in that field. For others who want to get into climate tech, I think it's really important to, like what we discussed before about having like actually useful skills and having done it before. If you join a startup at a variety of stages, that is, scaling up, you learn so much at actually working at a small company compared to what you learn at an MBA or a business master's. So doing that, even if it's not a climate company, is a very good way to get a general education and understanding for all the parts. And that will make you a much better advisor board member for climate companies. That's one way of doing it. Or going in and really becoming an expert in something. And I don't think it matters so much what within the climate space. There's so many problems to solve, and we need people to go out, in lots of these different niches and do things. The problem is when you don't decide and you just get paralyzed by the climate crisis. And the answer,
Paralysis,
at least
yes.
that I found, is to say, okay, well, I'm going to go like hardcore in one direction, learn as much as possible in that area and become a real expert in that. And that way you're much more valuable than you're a more valuable partner to a company specifically in that space than you've just done a little bit of everything and haven't really you committed to learning a lot about one area and really committing to something. So that's a general,
It's a
and that can be
gradual
anything.
step process then. And you learn, and then you recalibrate if you feel that you've gone in the wrong avenue, right? In the wrong sector. You can always recalibrate. Investor versus entrepreneur. I get this question a lot. Investor seems almost a de-risk avenue. It caters to people that are more generalists or analytical, so they can stimulate their intellectual stimulation more because they have more problem sets to tackle. What's your view on this, and what would you advise?
Oh, I don't think it's true I think that it's just a different set of challenges and you're dealing with as an entrepreneur or an investor. One, I'd say maybe it's in a lot of ways easier. If you get a job as an investor, I'd say that's less stressful than being an entrepreneur. Because as an entrepreneur, you're the puck really stops with you, and you have lots of these direct reports, and there's so many fires all the time, and it's so tricky to prioritize correctly, and there's no one to just pat you on the back and say, oh yeah, you're like, if you just do the things that your boss told you to do, you'll be fine. Like that doesn't exist as an entrepreneur. So I think that being an entrepreneur is more challenging and you learn a lot. In terms of which one to pick, I don't know how easy it is. I'd say it's probably pretty hard to get a job as an investor in climate, isn't it? Just like that. Whereas going into a startup and working on a big impact problem at some level of the company feels like it's a slightly easier and growing field, and also easier. Startups in general, if you do well and you prove yourself and you work hard, and you like have an ownership mentality, as an employee you can get sucked up very fast and get bigger and bigger projects, whereas as an investor it's trickier to have that really quick career progression. I mean, I was CEO at 22 when I founded my own company, and I learned a lot in that process. You don't have to be CEO directly, but even if you just join as an early employee, you just get to encounter so many more problems, and you get to solve so many more things than and be responsible for more things than if you join a more sort of traditional and static organization like an investor. Did I answer your question?
I think so. I think closing the loop on everything we discussed, yes. Right? The fact that Europe has definitely a shortage of entrepreneurial minded investors. And you're saying that it's also a gradual process to kind of find your path. It seems to me that the best sequence would be to start in a startup to gain operational experience, understand how complex, get the reality check, but also develop your network, and then understand how an organization can scale, and then at some point transition to become an investor. It's a more natural flow than the other way around. Coming from an investor, it seems like it's a more natural flow. Hearing you to go from entrepreneur to become an entrepreneur, or at least join a startup and then become an investor, versus the other way around.
I think so. The problem with with going directly to being an investor and then going into a startup is that you get expensive habits, I think, as an investor, and it's very hard to go back to the noodles and and freebie lifestyle of an entrepreneur once you get used to those expensive habits. So it's good to, the way to do it in that case is to make sure even as an investor or whatever you go into in the corporate world where you're getting a good salary, to not increase your expenses so much, build that buffer so that you dare take the step, because it's very hard once you've got those comforts to take a step back and say, okay, I'm just going to earn like 2,000-3,000 euros a month now for a year, and I don't know if this is gonna fly or not, and I don't know if I'll have a salary in 6 months' time. And so I'd say that in that sense as well, it's better to go to the entrepreneurial side first, or go and become an expert, like research some topic which is relevant for the green energy transition and the climate crisis, and then from there transition in as an expert into a startup, or an expert advisor to an investor.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great suggestion. Caroline, are you ready to jump into a rapid fire round? So really,
Yes.
I give you two options, option A, option B. You give me your preferred option, just with a short explanation.
Yes.
So the first question is, thesis first or people first? How do you select which projects to get personally involved in?
Thesis first, since we almost always get an email first or some pitch, and then we don't really see much of the people, but we do see the idea behind it.
So thesis.
But then, of course, people are very important as a second step, but thesis first.
Now, when you look at Walerud Ventures and your family office, would you rather scale up the model or keep it niche?
We'll keep it niche in the sense of we don't want to hire a bunch of people. However, my parents have said that they're probably on their last startups now, so they're not going to add, at most like one new investment maybe they'll do in this model. And then it's up to me to set what I think we should do with Walerud Ventures going forward. And I'm not sure what that is yet. I don't want to, I really love working in a team. And that's why working so actively with the startups is wonderful, because I'm part of this entrepreneurial team working towards a goal. I don't think I want to become an investor on my own. So I'll need to find a team to do that, or change around the model. And that's a project
or work on
to
the
think
next
about
generation family investors, but it might take 18 to 20 years to get there.
Exactly. So yeah, I think it's this is a project for 2023 where I really need to think about where we should bring Walerud Ventures, considering that my parents will slowly be working less. And I want a fulfilling and fun job, which also does very good for the environment. So let's see where that ends up.
Happy to help you think this through, and offer suggestions.
Yeah, I think I'd love that. And next year, I think this year there's a lot of things to do, but next year is my year for working on that.
All right.
So I'd appreciate the input.
And last question, bigger funds versus specialist funds. This is also a question we get a lot. What does Europe need more to accelerate the climate transition? So enormous funds in AUM, assets under management, or more specialist funds that are more nimble, but they're just more efficient?
Can I say both? If I had to pick, if they're generalist with a climate focus, or somehow that sounds good. I think it helps the startups when the investors are very clear on their investment thesis. So for example, the ones that say, okay, you need at least to solve a gigaton of emissions or whatever, then some startups will know, okay, we're not doing that. We're solving like biodiversity instead or something. But then I'd like to see more investors then that are also doing, like, looking at other aspects of green technology, because we need a lot of it. There's so many areas where we could be doing a lot better, and we need to work on all of them. So I'm glad there's a lot of startups out there and investors out there that can look at those things.
Here. Thanks so much, Caroline, for this great conversation. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, yes, thank you, Climentum, for hosting. Nice to talk to you today.
All right, thank you. Ciao, and thanks, guys, for listening in. If you want to listen to more great investors, don't forget to subscribe, and talk to you soon. Bye.